So my self-perception is only valid insofar as it is reciprocated in the external world by other individuals, right? The people who we do this most with, right, and it actually should be this, the people that we do this most with, these people actually have a name, right? So this would be like mom, dad, brother, siblings, immediate family, so on and so forth. The people that I do this interaction with the most actually have a name, and this group of people is known as the primary, P-R-I-M-A-R-Y, the primary group. This group of people that I interact with the most frequently, they actually have a name, and that name is the primary group. The primary group is to be distinguished from subsequent groups or subsequent interactions, especially social interactions, because in describing the primary group, it is through the primary group that I get my sense of values in the world, right? My sense of, not only my sense of values, but my sense of self, right? My primary group helps to shape the values that I have, which are determined by the society and also by the norms of that society, right? So by the social norms of that society, right? So that my primary group is going to, in their interaction with me, help to build a sense of self, this me being the objective, I being the subjective understanding of myself. And in this interaction with my primary group, I'm also going to have the added benefit of attaining values. And it's actually not equal to values, I get values, right? Values are a consequence of this, right? I attain a sense of values from my primary group. Those senses of value, that sense of values, is itself a consequence of social norms, right? And the question then becomes, what are social norms? I'm not going to get into too much detail on the idea of normativity, because that's a lecture in itself. But anytime we're discussing social norms, we recognize that there is a standard, right? A standard to which human behavior, human interactions are marked against, right, or governed. So that this standard of behavior, this standard of human interaction is justified by the norms, right? So the question then becomes, how do I assess whether or not my action is socially acceptable? Well, I would look at my action being X, right? And I would compare my action against the norm, right? So my action is X, I compare my action against the norm. If the norm says that I can do X, then my action is socially justifiable, right? It's moral, it's socially acceptable, so on. If I do action X and I compare my action X against the social norm, and the social norm says that I cannot do X, right? Then I cannot do X. Then I recognize that based on this norm, based on this standard, my action is immoral or socially reprehensible, right? So this idea of social acceptance or social reprehensibility is contingent on the idea of social normativity, right, or social norms. Now here's where it gets a little bit complicated in discussing symbolic interactionism. The point in discovering and understanding and trying to sort of articulate symbolic interactionism is to realize that there really is very little distinction between the individual and the social, right? The distinction, it's a micro-level analysis, micro, small, right? This is a micro-level analysis. The distinction between the individual and the primary group, or the individual and the social group, the individual in society, isn't that clearly defined. If I understand myself in terms of my interaction with other people, if I come to have an understanding of the me, of the I, with my interaction with others, right, and we're talking about many, many other people, right, many, many other people, then they too have an understanding of themselves right, in relation to their understanding and their interaction with me, right? And hence this sort of hermeneutic, right? Hence this sort of cyclical and closed figure, right? My relationship to others facilitates an understanding of self, just as their relationship to me facilitates an understanding of themselves, of their selves, right? Well, you can see then that it would be hard to distinguish the I, the individual, from the social, because really and truly they're almost interchangeable, right? My understanding of myself is only done insofar as I have interactions with others. Thus, society's existence as such is only valid insofar as there is an interaction really with me, right? Now, here's where the philosophy of mind comes in quite a bit, right? Because then we have to talk about sort of this understanding of the social, and the question then becomes, what is social? Or more specifically, what is society? Right? So this is what the question then becomes, right? What is the social, or what is society? In a discussion of symbolic interactionism, we recognize that it's the interaction that we have that we attain meaning in the world, and I'm going to talk about meaning in a second. But not only is it the meaning that we attain, well, it also becomes, if we're understanding and if we're trying to discuss society, and we're trying to understand our interaction with society, then the question is, well, what is this thing that we're trying to assess, right? What is society? The response to this is not necessarily Berkeleyan, right? I wouldn't go as far as saying it's a subjective idealist response, to be technical. But it does sound as if, in my understanding of symbolic interactionism at least, that the social is a consequence of our mental faculties, right? So that the social is mental, right? You cannot talk about society independent to human cognition, right? So the question might be, can there be society without human beings? The symbolic interactionists would have to answer that question resoundingly no. There is no society without human beings, because society is a consequence of our mental capacity, right? Our cognitive abilities. So the question to ask whether or not society could exist independent to the existence of human beings is to completely misunderstand symbolic interactionism, right? The foundation of society not only is a consequence of this interaction between human beings, but society itself is a consequence. It is necessitated by human cognition, the ability for human beings to sort of think. So hopefully that understands that. So the question is, what is social, what is society? Society is a consequence of the interaction between individuals and others, and society is a consequence of human cognitive ability, right? Society results from our cognitive abilities. But what we need to recognize is that in symbolic interactionism, it's not only the case that we're talking about these individuals, right, as just sort of individuals within a group, as sort of like nameless faces. Technically speaking, we're actually talking about persons, right? We're talking about persons, P-E-R-S. We're talking about persons, and then we have the discussion of personhood, right? And the question then becomes, what is personhood? What does it mean to be a person, right? Well, the idea of becoming a person, right? The idea of being human, the idea of attaining a certain status of personhood, and I'm not going to get into it too much because it becomes more philosophical and less symbolic interactionism, but the idea of personhood is that personhood is something which is attained, right? It's not something which is inherent, right? So there's a distinction between mere existence and the existence as a person, right? Attaining personhood. How do we come about this idea of personhood in a discussion of symbolic interactionism?